thousands of websites out there, and very few of them are providing accurate, independent research or research in a way that's easy to understand. There's obviously peer-reviewed journal articles, but they're very much pitched at other scientists. So if you would pick up a journal article, you know, a couple of sentences might make sense in the abstract, but then the rest of it goes into scientific jargon because scientists like to talk like that. And so that doesn't help either. The third channel is what's reported in commercial media, mainstream media, but the problems with that are, one, it doesn't get a lot of coverage because the very few articles that are out there about research tend to focus on diseases that they find slightly sexier. So MS doesn't get as much coverage as it should. Yeah, well, clearly, but it doesn't get as much coverage as everyone would, obviously. You know, you might get one story every sort of 6 months. The other problem with mainstream media is it's written by journalists who have just as much idea about the science as anyone else. Okay, they're not experts in the field either. And when I give presentations about MStranslate, one of the examples that I use is a short article that was in the Herald Sun about a research project that came out of our lab. It wasn't MS related, but in the space of a 2-paragraph article, they managed to get the researcher's name wrong, where the research was done wrong, and the main findings of the research wrong. So clearly we can't be leaving sort of this space to journalists, and it's, again, it's not their fault. They're not experts in it, so why are we expecting them to write about it? So this is where the concept of MStranslate came from. As well as research, I have a bit of a background in science communication. And so the real aim of MStranslate was to be providing a source of independent, accurate, easy to understand and easily accessible research information for people with MS. We've been going for about 18 months now. We're almost solely based on social media at the moment, on Facebook and on Twitter. On Twitter we've just gone past 1,500 followers, and on Facebook we're up to about 350. So what we've found is that there is definitely a community of people that are interested, and we are continuing to grow. And as Tony mentioned, this week marks the first week of a collaboration that we've started with the MS Research Group at the Melbourne Brain Centre, where for the last week of every month for the next 5 months we'll be featuring work that they're doing into MS. And as part of that, as Tony said, we had one of the researchers come on board last night that was open to anyone who was interested in coming and talk to him, and he was there for about 30 to 45 minutes to talk about his research and then answer questions about that. So we think it's a really important initiative. It's something that is completely unfunded at the moment, and so we're continuing to look into sources of funding, because to do this as well as we would like to do it, it really is a full-time job. Last year alone there was about 3,500 to 4,000 scientific papers that were published on MS. So that's about 10 a day being published. So there is a lot of research going on. So to be able to spend the time to get it all out there takes a lot of effort. So that's sort of me and where I'm coming from and my background. Sort of happy now just to take any questions that you have about MS or general MS research or research in general, PhD.
I presume I'm getting a lot of stuff that is relative or relevant for us. Tony's probably going through it all, passing it on to us through Facebook, yeah?
I am, and a lot of that's also coming from MStranslate.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You're taking the best thing of translate and sending it over to us.
Definitely. There's also a bit of, for people who are a little more scientific, you'll find that occasionally, if something grabs me in PubMed, I'll put at least the abstract on our page page as well. But your site, everything's just going straight across. So thank you.
Yeah, well, and with those abstracts, also, if you're interested in getting a more detailed but easy to understand summary of it,
Thank
all you
you.
need to do is just post it to me either on MStranslate or email it to me, and I'm happy to write the sort of summaries that we write. So it tends to be that when we do our paper summaries, so we post a lot of different sorts of content because we don't just want to be solely scientific.
Because those summaries are more for the layman.
Yeah, definitely. So I will read the article and then I sort of break it down into about 2 paragraphs, which sort of follows the general structure of here's a little bit of background as to why they did this research, here's what they found, and here's why this is important. Because that last bit is almost the most important part of it, and the bit that's lacking is it needs to be put in some context as to why do you care about this research. Because there's a lot of research that goes on, and if you just read their findings, we found that this gene is somewhat upregulated, and you go, that's great, but what does that mean for me? And so that's sort of how we try and pitch it at the end of all those summaries is, and this is why this is important, this is where it might lead. But it's important, and what we do is that we make that realistic. Okay, a lot of the research that's going on now isn't going to be something that's going to lead to new therapy or cure in the next 6 months to a year. Okay, research that's coming out now that could lead to clinical trials is
8 to 10 year away.
10 years away from having a drug potentially going into the market. The whole process of clinical trials, and we put up an article a while ago about explaining all the different stages that you have to go through to that, but it is a very lengthy and costly process.
So you reading every article and sort of putting in layman's terms through this MStranslate?
Yeah, probably not every article. I didn't read 4,000 articles last year.
I'm just saying, 10 a day or whatever.
Yeah, look,
you just go the best 2 or 3.
Yeah, we're keeping on top of the research that's coming out as well as we can. Obviously, so I also work at Melbourne Uni as a tutor in the department to try and pay the rent.
Having said that, then what sticks out of recent times that might be of interest to us, that what they're doing in terms of possibly not finding a cure for MS, but getting closer to it anyway. And what will be based on like stem cell or medication?
Oh, that's really.
You still don't know.
To be honest, I mean, the prospect of a cure at the moment is a while off, and that's because we still don't have an idea of what's causing MS. I mean,
You don't know what it is before you can
yeah.
And that would be great for us to know, like, what is it, a certain gene that you've got in your body? Is it, like,
But we would love to.
what does this person get and this person doesn't? Like, a relatively healthy person,
Yeah.
what does this person get? And someone who abuses their body shoppingly gets nothing.
Yeah.
I'm not putting you in there. I'm pointing at you, go, I hope.
And that's the complicated part of it, and it is, I mean, we do know with relative confidence now that there are genetic components that increase your risk. There are environmental components that increase your risk. But how the two of them interact and what else is involved, we're still trying to put those pieces together. And the other difficulty is that any 2 people with MS have such different presentations and such different outcomes. And that makes it tough to work out what's going on. And I think in the first hangout that we had, we were talking to me, one of the things that we discussed is there a possibility that MS is really just an umbrella term that covers a variety of different disorders? Because everyone has such different outcomes, is it not actually one condition? Is it a variety of different conditions that all have different causes that all lead to?
No, I think there's one central thing that everybody has got that's going in the brain.
Yeah, but are they resulting from slightly different causes? And I mean, this is one of, I guess, the big things of 2013, and probably the most controversial thing of 2013 in MS research, but was great in a way because it brought a whole heap of awareness, was CCSVI. CCSVI is all about the narrowing of veins leading to the brain, and some people suggest that there's evidence that if you widen those, it improves blood flow and can actually, some people claim, cure MS.
But then someone works for it, someone doesn't, so
Yeah.
you know, it's like anything.
Which sort of points to is it different causes for different people. Personally, I'm not convinced on CCSVI. Not because I don't believe it's possible, but just we need a lot more research into it before the people who are making it.
Scientist or something, you go to his wife.
Yeah, Zamboni, yeah. So again, it's just one of those things that we need more research into to work out what's going on. So yeah, to go back to the initial question, we need to find out what's going on. There are lots of papers that point to potential causes. There was one that came out from a guy in Queensland, Michael Pender, recently looking at Epstein-Barr virus. He claims that in one patient, when they cleared, the way this works, to break it down simply, is that Epstein-Barr virus is the virus that causes glandular fever. And many people get infected with the virus but don't get glandular fever. But about 80 to 90% of the population has been infected with this virus. So almost all of us here will have had Epstein-Barr virus infection, even if we don't get glandular fever. But what Epstein-Barr virus does, EBV does, is that it hangs around in your body. It never gets completely cleared. So it just goes into this hibernation state, essentially, in your body.
But you're speaking sort of like shingles, which I got last year.
Yeah, similar sort of thing. Well, they're from the same family of viruses.
So
they just
stay dormant in the system.
stay dormant, yeah, and it's just in different parts of the body, essentially, is why. So that's herpes simplex virus, causes HSV, causes shingles, chickenpox, and Barr virus. Yeah. And so what this researcher claimed was if we can completely eliminate Epstein-Barr virus, then that will help MS. So what he claimed was that the EBV lays dormant for a while, and eventually it's just getting constant stimulation of the immune system around that area, around the nerves, and then that causes MS. So what he did was he took T cells out of this one person with MS, put them in the lab, grew them up in the presence of the virus to make them react against it strongly, put them back into that person.
So T cells are stem cells, don't they?
No, sorry, T cells are cells that form part of your immune system and are widely regarded as the type of cell that causes the damage in MS. When you put these T cells back in, these immune cells back in, cleared the virus, making no virus left over, and the person, so he followed them across about 13 weeks, was when it finished for the publication, and that person had seen significant improvement. So they'd gone from really being not able to walk to being able to walk, significant improvements in brain function, cognitive function. So this paper was published going, we need to do a bigger trial on this to see whether or not this is actually something relevant. So, but you have that viral potential cause. Vitamin D is obviously another one that's big. And today on MStranslate we'll be putting up a video with one of the guys at the Brain Centre who is heavily involved in the PREVANS study. So I don't know if you've heard of the PREVANS study, but it's a study across Australia and New Zealand, variety centres where they're taking people at the very start of their MS journey, essentially, so they've only had one attack. Okay, so it's technically not MS yet, because obviously MS is multiple attacks. This is after the single one, and putting them into 4 groups of either placebo or 3 different doses of vitamin D to see whether or not this halts the progression of
And this
MS.
is only very early in the piece, isn't it?
Yeah, they've only just started recruiting, so this will be 2 or 3 years before they have the sort of results from this. But vitamin D, I guess, is just another one.
Well, the LMS speaks very highly of that LMS. I mean, that vitamin D, don't they? Vitamin D within the LMS diet and stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Because mine was down a little bit, and I got, because I was just talking to these guys about it in the States, but like your normal dosage is 1,000 IMU, I think, tablets, but they had 50,000 IMU tablets over there, so I popped a couple of those,
Yeah.
blew it off again. And at the check last, it was 300 a day.
Yeah.
Big H after it. I said, what is H? And they said, high.
Yeah, and I mean, vitamin D is a particularly interesting one for a variety of reasons. Because if you look at a map of MS, you see that if you live around the equator, your chance of getting MS is much lower than if you live further away.
Yeah.
And in fact, in Australia alone, if you live in Tasmania, yeah, your risk is about 7 times higher than if you live in northern Queensland.
Yeah.
But more interestingly than that, it seems to be only where you live until you're about 10 to 15 that correlates with your risk. So if you live in northern Queensland until you're 25 and then move to Tassie, your risk is still the same as everyone else in northern Queensland.
That's what I couldn't understand when I was first diagnosed. I read that and I thought, Tony too, she did the same. We grew up like in the Mallee and the other side of Mildura, and it's hot as hell up there.
Yeah.
And the sun, we'd always be outside in the sun and all that. And I thought, I lived there till I was like 21, and so I think that doesn't work.
Yeah, and this is again, it's that environment, genes, how are they working together? So it's almost like at the stage where we've got all the pieces of the puzzle, but we've just pulled them out on the
I was
table,
going to say, there's no.
and we're still trying to find the more pieces.
Yeah.
So I mean, it is a long.
It's a thousand chest positive.
Yeah. But as we start to piece it together, and I think again this is something that I talked about when we talked last time, one of the things that I think is crucial moving forward is that there's so many different research groups working on different areas. If you look at all these things in isolation, we're not going to get to the answer. Everyone needs to start working
Doing the same
together
thing.
and going, well, I'm working on this genetic part, but I'm working on this environment part. Well, maybe we need to see how our research fits together. And again, that's part of what we hope to do a bit with MStranslate. And what really, really, really needs to start happening is researchers need to
But
start.
that comes from the funding too, though, doesn't it? Shouldn't the funding be able to sort of say, hey, you're not going to get that unless you work with this person?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Do you want my 5-minute rant on funding? If we just talk about funding really quickly. As a researcher, or as a previous researcher, it's really difficult to do the research you want to do. And actually there's not a lot of incentive to go into research at the moment, because you do minimum 7 to 8 years of study. And once you get out, generally at best you're getting a 1-year contract because you're based and this is not just individual scientists, there's labs as well, going year to year based on the funding that they get. Last year, of all of the projects that put in applications to the NH and MRC, 17% were funded. This year it's predicted to go down to about 11%. The fact that we no longer have a Minister for Science indicates that it's probably not going to get better. So it's a particularly difficult field to get into, and that's a bit why researchers need to focus on things that are going to get outcomes quickly. Because unless you get those outcomes quickly, you're not getting funding for the next year. So the sort of projects that go, look, this is a great project, but it's going to take us 2 to 3 years to get the results, they tend not to get supported. And researchers tend to move away from them because they know they're not going to have the money to do it. So, yeah, funding makes it difficult, and the sort of why they fund the research that they fund is again, there's often diseases that are the flavours of the month, and they will be the ones that are more heavily funded. MSRA does do a great job of funding MS research, but again, they can only fund so much.
Ultimately, though, isn't there going to be some neurological discovery that's going to sort of start to cure a lot of the diseases that are out there? Will be having something to do with the brain, stem cell birth, whatever, but they'll be able to correlate that to that particular disease or that particular problem you've got.
I don't think we're at the point where we can say that with any sort of certainty. Stem cells. Look, stem cells are a while away from being common use. And stem cells are one of the ones that are particularly difficult to sort of talk about in terms of their importance and their usefulness in terms of curing this sort of stuff. There is a lot of anecdotal evidence that says stem cell transplants can help potentially cure diseases.
Well, it has.
Including
Some of
MS.
it
Yeah.
just like anything.
Yeah. But stem cells, I mean, it's different to vitamin D, where you can take 50,000 unit tablets. It's not really going to have any negative side effects. The procedure of stem cell therapy is, it's not safe.
Yeah.
That's why it's not really done here very much. And many people will go overseas to other countries to get
They have done a few cases here in Canberra, I know.
Yeah, there's one guy that's done two.
Yeah.
But
But they didn't know enough about it, and he was just left high and dry and
Yeah.
very ill because he had no immune system.
yeah, and that's the thing, they have to completely kill off your immune system to do
Exactly.
it. So, yes, potentially stem cells will become important, but again, they're long term. I think we're going to find. So I think it's an autoimmune disease. Just to lay my cards down on the table as to where my beliefs are, and that's partly because my PhD focused on that side of things. So obviously, slight bias, but I think all the evidence out there indicates that there is certainly an immune component to it. So what we really need to work out is there is a system in everyone that's meant to go foreign, self, attack this, don't attack this. Something happens in these diseases that goes attack this and attack this, and we need to know what that is. If we can work out what that trigger point is, then we can start to target
You
that.
related to this. How it checks out nerves and that sort of thing, a mild sheath, and it's don't know why it does.
No, they don't know why it does. So there's the EBV story, where there's this process called molecular mimicry, which essentially means that part of a virus looks like part of the myelin. And so the T cell that reacts against this also reacts against this once it gets going. Or so what my research was looking into was proteins are made, if you think about it like a car coming out of a manufacturing plant, made like that, but often once the car rolls off the assembly line and you get it, you can make modifications to it. Okay, put a souped up engine, you can put your own tyres on them. And that happens a lot in the body, that these proteins will get modified after they're made. We know that the key protein in myelin gets modified quite heavily, and this happens in normal people and healthy individuals. Sorry, I slipped at the tongue. In healthy individuals, but what they've also shown is that in people with MS, this modification happens a lot more. Now, what one of the theories is that during development, all these proteins are shown to the immune system as you're growing up, so that any immune cells that come along and recognise proteins that they're not meant to, so your own self proteins, get killed, essentially, so that they're not circulating, so get rid of them early. The sort of theory is that these modified proteins aren't shown during development because they're only shown when it's normal places of the protein. And so that cells that react against that modified form are allowed to just float around because they're not killed off further in development. And that may link nicely to the vitamin D story, that maybe vitamin D slightly alters what's presented during development, which is why you do tolerise yourself against these self proteins, and that's why it's only important in the first sort of 10 years of your life, because then you've killed off all of the cells that may be going around. But it's all speculation.
Yeah, what you're saying is that after 10 years, if you've been given that number, you're going to get it anyway.
You've certainly got an increased chance, yeah. But why that is, we don't know. The common thread as we go through this is we still don't know. We're learning more and more, but again, they're these little dots that aren't joined yet.
My neurologist said to me probably 10, 15 years ago, they will get a cure in your lifetime. And he doesn't say much. It's
So
pretty well
that's
received.
30 odd years ago.
Really? Very well received. Just chasing the tail.
No, look, I think we are getting closer, and look, I strongly believe that we will get there, and we will get there.
Yep. In your lifetime.
In my lifetime, hopefully. A lot of the data might already be out there. It's just trying to piece it together.
Yeah.
And I think we're at the stage now where we can start to look at this stuff on a bigger sort of scale. The technology's catching up with where we need to be to. So the studies that we were talking about last night, the research last night, is involved in a project called MS Base, which is essentially a registry of people with MS. So it's 66 countries, I think, throughout the world, over 200 centres. And essentially, whenever someone with MS meets their neurologist is putting all this information into the database. So then they've now got information across 10 years of seeing people, and they're able to start getting answers to some of these questions. So one of the studies that this guy was involved in was looking at women and men relapse rate and things like that. And so he could show that women do get relapses more often than men, but they tend to recover better than men as well from these relapses. So while they have more of these relapses, men actually progress quicker in terms of their MS because they don't recover as well from these relapses. And the neurologists have always speculated about this because they've seen it they can sort of speculate based on the people that they're seeing coming into the clinic. But now they actually have the data to go, look, this is true. Similarly, they had data to look into, so, let me get this right, natalizumab, which is Tysabri, if my drug name's right, so it's the most effective MS drug out at the moment. But there has been a small number of reported cases of people on Tysabri getting PML, which is...
I'm tested for that every 6 months.
Yeah. So there is a number of people who have shifted from Tysabri to Gilenya. The long scientific name, can't remember. It's a leukoencephalopathy, essentially. It's almost like a leukemia. It's been fatal in a couple of people that have been on Tysabri.
So if you've got the JC virus, you can't take.
Yeah, so they test to see whether or not you've got
Because I've got the
antibodies.
JC virus.
Yeah. So once, if you do turn up positive for JCV, then once they switch you off Tysabri. And so the common second choice at the moment is moving to Gilenya. But there was then a small number of reported cases of people who switched from Tysabri to Gilenya who experienced really severe relapses after going on to Japan. And so they had all of this data in this registry, following people over a long period of time. They split them into 3 groups: people going from Tysabri to Gilenya, people going from other drugs to Gilenya, like the interferons to Gilenya, and then people who were taking Gilenya as their first MS treatment. And what they saw is that there is actually no increase in terms of risk for people going from Tysabri to Gilenya. So there may be a small side effect associated with it with Gilenya in some people, but it's not. If you are going from Tysabri to Gilenya, you shouldn't be worried about that based on this small number of cases. They're just isolated incidents. So having all this information out there now it's really useful, and they're able to answer a lot of these questions that they weren't able to answer before. What research needs to do and expand on this, and it was one thing that they talked about last night, and one thing that I think we're hoping to improve through MStranslate is that researchers can do all the research they want at the bench. The people who really know what's happening in MS is the people with MS. We don't know what's coming. If we can look at cells under microscopes, we can look at proteins, and the people that really know what's going on.
We know what's going on.
Yes. And so we need to have a way to start listening to people with MS, hearing what they're saying about what's going on, and then try and take that back to the science, rather than doing the science and try and tell you guys what's going on.
Brett, can I just mention, if I may interrupt, I hope you don't
You can
mind.
definitely interrupt and talk as well.
In 1987, I nursed at the Benalla Base Hospital where I did district nursing, and I don't know if you know Victoria very well, but you know where Cobram is on
Yep.
the border. Come down, sort of like you've got Cobram up here, come down Wangaratta, and Kilmore's down here, more Seymour. And in that belt, where the northeast at the time looked after those sort of people, the nurses, patients, and so forth. In that belt, there was 26 patients or people who suffered MS, and obviously research back then was very non-existent from what I know, but there was 2 men and 24 women, all varying different ages, but what we nurses understood back then, you know, because it was very little obviously with research, but there was all chemical exposure, whether it be by farms or fruit and vegetables, what you eat or whatever. And I was wondering if you had a look at that angle with your research.
Certainly not with my research. I haven't looked into it. Actually don't know of any real papers that have looked at chemical exposure too much. Certainly the female to male ratios that you're talking about seems to point towards some role of sex hormones, and in particular estrogen. So Thomas talked a bit about this last
What are you
night.
telling me I should have been better?
Not too late for well, because what's interesting, again, this was stuff that Thomas talked about last night, is that in the average population, the ratio is about 3 to 1, which is it's actually increased, sort of even from when I started my PhD, which is a bit of a while ago now. It was about 2 to 1. But as we're getting more and more information, it's looking closer to 3 to 1. If you look at girls, very young girls, before they start going through puberty, and boys who have MS then, the ratio is about 1 to 1. If you look at women post-menopause, the ratio comes down a lot again. It's probably back to about 2 to 1 there. Pregnant women in about their 2nd trimester are essentially protected from relapses. And this is when these hormone levels
So
are really high.
my life didn't get my way.
So again, it's just another one of these go, well, it must be involved somehow, but how? And that's the $1 million question.
But it's funny, they say sun exposure is good for us, but humidity's not.
No.
So, you know, it's the same thing. You don't want to get hot with their mouth, but they say sit in the sun.
And obviously you need to be careful of your sun exposure for other reasons. So it's, I mean, that's tough.
Yeah.
It is, and with all of these. Well, I mean, with any sort of treatment option, be it lifestyle or medication, what works for one person isn't necessarily going to work for another. I mean, we see that with medications. Some person might be on Tysabri and works perfectly.
That's what I was just these days, you know, on my 70th or 75th or something, close to so I've had it for once a month for probably 5 or 6 years. But, you know, I get an MRI every 6 months and they say, oh, well, we can't see any further progression of your scarring in the brain. And I say, yeah, but I know I'm getting slightly worse, so maybe the scars are millions of millimetre bigger. You can't see it by the human eye.
There was a report or an article last year at some point, I think, or the year before, that suggested that these lesions weren't actually associated with worsening neurological function or increased disability. That's been contradicted by a lot of other studies.
Makes sense.
But there is some evidence from at least one study that suggests that your lesions don't necessarily need to increase for you to, or flip side, you may get more lesions, but you don't necessarily get worse. So
it doesn't correlate that, in a way.
I think it probably does. Again, it may just be some people doesn't match with what everyone else sort of does. But yeah, no, that's okay.
Thank you for coming on, Jen.
See you later. See you later.
Right now, a question about what in particular we can be doing to get more people to come along and be on board with MStranslate. I'm, as you know, an absolute advocate for what you're doing. I have long believed that there is such a terrible gap between what the scientists do and the researchers do, and what the practitioners do, and what the people with the condition know about all of those things. So you're just joining all of those dots beautifully.
Yeah, you want to get us on the same plane for the patient.
Yeah, so what can we do?
The first step would definitely be just to like MStranslate on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter, and I think you've got I can send an email with all that information in. Business cards with you. That's
Send it
sort of
to us.
send it to us. Well, all the links should be the Facebook link will be on there. From when you share stuff, it comes up with shared photos, translate. That's the first step. Promote it to everyone you know to get them on board. Because really, our key thing is the more momentum we get, the greater leverage we have to be pushing this with people to get them on board. It was from.
How do we get you closer to gaining access to funding that you saw the
Just make it more well known.
Yeah, the stronger a case we have for this being something that people want, the greater our case will be to get funding, essentially. The more outspoken people are about how much they want this service, that's the best thing that we can do at the moment to push it. So what I will say is we're going to keep going regardless. We know that this is a good thing to be doing. We would just like to be putting even more time and effort into it than we currently are. So yeah, spreading the word, being outspoken about it.
Sorry, that Minister for Science, was that state level or federal? Federal.
We don't have a Minister for Climate Change either.
No, they meet me.
Okay, so
We don't have a Minister for Science, but we have a Minister
Nuclear energy.
Yeah, so I mean, we're trying to push networks and push buttons with people. We had a meeting with Simon McKee, which some of you may or may not know. Simon was Australian of the Year a few years ago now. He's a director of a number of major banks. Was one of the early patrons of MSRA and MS Australia. He has MS himself. So we had a meeting with him to talk about it, and he actually just recently wrote what was commissioned to write the McKee Review, which was essentially about where science needs to go in Australia. The current government obviously shredded it and decided not to pay any sort of attention to it, but one of his key points was that what we need to be moving to is the people doing the research need to be the ones talking about the research. So he understands what's going on and where we need to go. But unfortunately he tried to push a few buttons at MSRA, but that's led nowhere. We had lengthy discussions last year with a number of the state-based MS organisations to form a partnership with them, because obviously they have existing networks of people, and our thing all along has been that we don't want to fragment the community. We're not out here to be competition to what's already existing. So we wanted to work with them to provide them with this content that they could then put up on their networks. We were in discussions with them for about 9 months, constantly jumping through hoops and giving them more and more information and more examples. And then late last year, they turned around and said, sorry, we're not going to do it. So that was frustrating, to put it nicely. But, you know, we're not going to stop doing what we're doing. So we actually are. We know what we're doing is good, and we know we can do it better than what is already being done. So
MStranslate, that was a subject.
MStranslate, yeah. There will be a website associated with it. There was a website associated with it. The website got hacked twice in the space of a month by some group in China that decided it was worth their time to do it. So our website is down at the moment while we try and fix that and make it hack-proof. But all of our content goes up on our Facebook page and our Twitter account.
Brett, have you looked particularly at what was presented at ECTRIMS in Scandinavia last year?
Yeah, we did a bit of coverage on ECTRIMS when it was going on.
Yeah.
Look, one of the main things that we would love to do if we had some funding was go and provide live coverage of ECTRIMS and these major conferences as they're going on, because again, while I think MSRA did some live coverage of ECTRIMS, it was minimal and it was still very sciencey, so it didn't really help the people out who needed to know about it. So we would love to go to these conferences, give summaries on talks, do interviews with the researchers there, do some Google Hangouts. There's no limit to what we know we can do with this. It's just getting the money to do it, unfortunately. So
If I can take the opportunity just briefly to really emphasise how fabulous it is to do the Hangouts with Brett on, it is Hangouts, isn't it?
good.
Yeah.
And Brad has managed to help me book in so that I can get access to such valuable information from brilliant academics as we did last night, and Brett. So I cannot emphasise enough how fabulous it is to be involved, and Brett gives you every opportunity to ask any question you want while you are logged in, and he can see you through whiz-bang Can I tease it?
Both the Google Hangouts that we've run so far, so the one we did one with me and one with Thomas last night, they're both available on YouTube. So if you search for MStranslate on YouTube, we have a channel, so you can go back and watch both of those Hangouts. You might not want to watch mine, and it goes on for a bit over an hour, so it's a long. As you might have picked up on today, I can talk when I get going about this sort of stuff. So we did talk for quite a while in that one. The one last night we for over 30 minutes, but they are there, so you can go back and watch them at any point, and you can see what shows exactly how they show up on the screen, so you can see what they're like. And I think, would you have posted the link to it? If not, the link's on our Facebook page. I can post it to the.
I'll post it on our page so
Yeah.
it's easy,
Easy to
so
see.
people don't have to jump around through.
And the old
pages.
one will be there too. I can send you the link to the first one we did. But no, they are really good. They're something that we're going to do. There will certainly be one that forms part of each of these feature weeks with the Brain Centre. So we'll have another 4 coming up with researchers from the Brain Centre. And I think we'll just try and do as many as we can during the time, because they're quite easy to
So
do.
once a week, once a month.
Yeah, so there will be ones. There'll definitely be one once a month, and then from the Brain Centre. If we can get other people involved, we will try and do that. I'm happy to do ones every week if people want to come talk to me every week, but I probably won't. As long as it's
We just want you to surmise it all and just give us the ones we
Just
want to
give-
hear.
well, and I mean that's something that we're thinking about doing as well as these sort of short.
Because there's a lot of
Summaries.
people that get there that just get us nowhere.
Yeah, as long as they're short sort of written summaries, I'm thinking that what might be worthwhile is to do a 5-minute video where I say this is what's come out in
Yeah.
this research this
Yeah.
week.
Better.
So all things that we're thinking, and again, if you're following us on Facebook or on Twitter, the more suggestions and feedback we get about stuff that you guys want. We're all about two-way conversation. You don't just want to hear me rabbiting on all the time. We want to hear what you guys want. So if there's an article that you've stumbled upon, if there's a question that you have, if you say you would prefer a little video on this, just say it and we'll do it. It's one thing that we think sets us a bit apart from what's out there at the moment, because one of the things that I picked up very early when we were starting this was we did quite a bit of monitoring of the other MS organisations' social media page, including MSRAs, and we noticed that they got a lot of negative comments on there, and their response was either ignore or delete, and that's just goes completely against what we had. And in fact, just as we were launching, there was a couple that were constantly posting on the MSRA website who were very negative about the research that was being done. I got in contact with them via Facebook and said, look, I just really like to understand where you're coming from. Do you want to sit down for a coffee? So I met them, we had chatted for about an hour and a half. They were very pro CCSVI and very much about, if you know anything about the CCSVI group,
Yeah, but
some of them are very, very
it's like
pro.
1 in 10 though, isn't it? There's
Yeah.
a lot of people that jump on it because it's sort of...
But there's some that are, I mean, we've met with some more CCSVI people, and some are really balanced, and we just want CCSVI to be given exposure, awareness, and so we can do the trials to find out if it is involved, and it may help some people, it may not help others. But there is the small minority that go, this is definitely the cause. Everything, all the other research that's being done is rubbish. And this is essentially where the two people were coming from. They were sort of in that minority. But when we talked a bit, we sort of understood where they were coming from. And they've actually been quite positive contributors to our page since then, and haven't been completely different mindset to how they were on the MSRA page.
Exactly, yeah.
It's that two-way conversation, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier. No one knows MS better than